I'm Megan Spurline, news editor at the Vidette, the student voice of Illinois State University, and a reporter for WGLT. Welcome to Democracy's Future, a joint project between the Vidette and WGLT News. We hear from the students who will help chart the future of our democracy. On this episode of Democracy's Future, we'll be talking with three conservatives who weren't always conservatives, but who were influenced by the issues and the shift of the political climate during their lifetimes. We'll hear from the head of college Republicans at ISU, and we'll hear from the controversial group Turning Point USA. First is Braden Gonzalez, president of Students for Life of America, a pro-life organization at ISU. He's a sophomore political science major from Frankfort, about 100 miles northeast of Bloomington Normal. Gonzalez tells Vidette reporters Paul Aguilar and Maggie Blyer his view of U.S. democracy is positive.
I like the style of American democracy because it is a little bit more reliant on aspects of a republic. I believe in more localized principalities in replacement of a big federal government. But yeah.
Do you think the U.S. currently embodies a true democracy?
I think so. I think to the extent that is practical in the world, because a true democracy would be every person votes on every single thing, and clearly Americans do not have time for that. And so we embody just about what you can get practically in the real world. So yes.
So going back in time a little bit, let's say back to your childhood, what sort of experiences and what sort of things did you see and or hear that have helped to shape your political views now?
Well, for the longest time, because I was a silly kid, I always considered myself a socialist for a very long time, and it's because I always cared for people. And it's no surprise to me that this doctrine has, consumed, or at one point consumed, half the world, because it's very easy to understand the basic concept that you're being exploited by the bourgeoisie. And so for the longest time I carried that. But I also did no research. And so about, I'd say, freshman year of high school, I actually did some further research, and I realized the absolute carnage inflicted by the communists and the socialists. And I actually, I became an atheist. I doubted God because, how could God let this happen? Luckily, I got out of this rut, and I kind of shifted towards conservatism. And the reason I did is because of my father. My father's an immigrant from the Philippines. He left in the 1980s, escaping political persecution. And he came to this country with about $100 in his pocket. His first meal was Spam. My household loves Spam. And he really lived the American dream. He came here with awful asthma. He literally had to run to save his life, because if he wasn't running to fix his asthma, he would have been sent back because he didn't have the money to pay for his medication. It's a really inspiring experience. And looking back, my brother, said when we heard his story, my brother would say, well, you just got lucky. And on top of that, if it wasn't luck, you shouldn't have to work that hard to succeed like that. And I couldn't disagree more. I feel like that's a great way to live a very unhappy life. And so I lean very conservative for that reason. I feel like conservatives are they're happier folks, they're more generous folks. And I think it's because they realize that everything in their life is their fault in some extent. You have to control your own life to be happy. And so I really like that. I could definitely tell the difference between right and left. And it's one is you're in control and one you're not.
That's something I'm wondering, Braden, as since you're the president of Students for Life of America, what garnered your interest in the pro-life movement?
Yeah, well, for the longest time, I was interested in politics, and I never even thought of something like that, of abortion and all this stuff. And but I, in high school, I was kind of a scumbag. And so in my senior year, my mom had to force me to this pregnancy resource center and be like, you're going to do all your charity hours here. And I said, okay, fine. And I met the greatest, oldest woman I've ever met. Her name was Mrs. Susan. And she worked so hard just to make sure women were supported in their pregnancies. And she even brought up the topic of abortion to me. I had no idea what it even was. I didn't even know what a baby in the fetus, I didn't even know what a baby in the womb even looked like. I assumed it was just I don't know. I kind of pictured it as kind of how like a lot of people who are pro-abortion sees it. Like, as soon as it was out in the world, then it was a life. I never pictured how it was inside. And I don't know. I was really inspired through her example of working hard with all these women. She actually like worked herself to death. She was a 6-year-old woman who spent like 80 hours a week at the Pregnancy Resource Center. She worked herself to the bone. And through her example, I became pro-life.
What is your perspective on this year's presidential election? I think, how are you feeling about it at this current moment? Any predictions?
I am not the biggest fan. I'm not a big fan of the candidates. Obviously I'm just like Biden for, obvious reasons. He's very pro-choice. But Trump, who has said many times, I am the most pro-life president ever, which is a complete lie. That man called DeSantis's abortion ban disgusting, which is repulsive for him to say that because he's like, I'm the most pro-life president ever. He's definitely not the best we could have had. I think it's very silly. I will never go after his supporters, though. A lot of his supporters are like lost Americans who are so foreign to the political structure, and they were ignored by right and left. In many ways, Trump's supporters are almost like a spirit of like, I don't want to say like a spirit of oppression, but it's like they are like coming back. They are punishing us. Like Trump, I think Trump's going to win this coming election. And it will because we ignored these people. We ignored his supporters for so long. And so I will never go after his supporters because they have almost every right to think what they think. And that's why Trump has this like cult following. But yes, I will be voting for Trump.
Braden Gonzalez says he used to consider himself an atheist, but he has since changed his mind, hoping to multiply and fill the earth, which he takes from scripture. He says his main goal is to get married and have a big family with 8 children, all sons. This is Democracy's Future. Next on Democracy's Future, Ross Vansel is president of ISU's College Republicans. Vansel is a sophomore from Stronghurst, a tiny village in west central Illinois. He tells Vidette student reporter Paul Aguilar, the College Republicans group has about 60 active members at ISU.
So our biggest goal that we have is to provide a opportunity for conservatives on campus to come to a place and can feel safe sharing their conservative ideas when some people don't feel safe doing that in classrooms. And then our second big thing is to connect our members to political candidates and allow them to see local candidates and also work on their campaigns to gain kind of experience in the political field if they would like.
What exactly shaped your political views growing up? What was different things that you saw or different things that your family was concerned with? Or
So I would say a big part of my upbringing was that I was raised in a rural community and I was raised in a Christian household. And those are two big things that influenced my views that I have now, I would say. I went to church every week. I had a strong Christian mother who instilled Christian values in me, and I've grown with those values, and those values have evolved into conservative values for me.
So how do you feel about democracy in the U.S.?
I think democracy in the U.S. is great. I think it is the best form of democracy in the world. It's obviously not a pure democracy, but it's the best democracy in the world, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the U.S. currently embodies a true democracy, even now?
I think so, and I think it's the closest we can get to democracy. I wouldn't say we are as strong of a democracy as we maybe once were, but we still embody democracy, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. What makes you say that you think we don't embody as strong of a democracy as we did in the past?
I think the lack of communication between different political sides is a huge problem, and a problem that has evolved over time, where sides used to be able to come together and have compromise and work together on more issues, and now it is more polarized, and the sides make each other out to be enemies, and it's not productive for the American people at large, and that has led to some inability for the government and political parties to actually get meaningful things done.
What do you think can be done to change that?
I think it is very hard to change that because there's been a long process to get where we are. I think we have to start treating each other as humans, as being more humanizing with each other, and understanding that we are all people made in the image of God, and that we are all one people and we're all in one country and we all want the best for each other. And right now, people are at each other's throats, and we don't have a common idea or common ground that we can get on right now. And we need to be able to find that common ground.
Ross Vansel with ISU College Republicans says he hopes to work as a lawyer, double dipping in both politics and law as a legal studies and political science double major. This is Democracy's Future. And next on Democracy's Future, we profile Turning Point USA, a nonprofit organization that promotes conservative politics on high school and college campuses. The Anti-Defamation League and Southern Poverty Law Center have criticized the group for its ties to far-right activists. Riley Wassler is president of Turning Point USA on the Illinois State University campus. Wassler is a senior physics major from the Chicago suburb of Darien. He faced a major turning point in his own political journey. We'll get to that in a minute. First, Wassler tells Vidette reporters Paul Aguilar and Maggie Blyer what he sees Turning Point's platform and how the group tries to get Gen Z engaged in politics.
We're pretty much just focused on issues. And so most of the stuff we tend to focus on is freedom of speech and limited government, freedom of markets, and pretty much anything in that category. And so we tend to be right of the spectrum.
All right, so what inspired you to join and eventually become the president of Turning Point USA here at Illinois State?
So when I met Kevin, or the president of Turning Point USA, he and I had a bunch of disagreements because I was a hardcore communist. And so I was pretty much a Stalinist, and he was pretty much pro-free speech, everything else, allowed me to speak, and I found that very respectable and honorable. And over time, as I grew out of that from freshman year, I actually went 180, and I had a violent reaction to the action that was me being a communist. And so actually now I'm the complete opposite. And so I went from this leftist sort of communist ideology to now of a right, like, nationalist ideology. And so most people tend to disagree with me on certain things, but that's okay. I've seen both sides, and honestly, it's pretty much the best thing that someone can see.
This is kind of going away from that, but I want to bring up this question since it is very important. How do you feel about democracy in the U.S.?
And so democracy inherently brings about factionalism for people, because now today it's worse than ever. So someone who's on the right end of the spectrum will not talk to someone who's on the left end of the spectrum, and vice versa. Our generation, Gen Z, is the worst at this. 33% of people will not have friends from other sides of the political spectrum, and that is inherently against our version of democracy. But because there's so much internal factionalism now and no one wants to talk with each other, there's no point in reaching unity or discussion. And so the whole purpose of democracy now has been undermined and is no longer viable. So now people push for more autocratic and authoritarian viewpoints. And that's what our generation is coming to. We don't believe in coming to the table to discuss things. It's whoever wields the sword and is able to use the sword, that's the one who makes the decision.
You said something about how Generation Z is not voting as much as they should be when they are the proper voting age. So how do you think, what kind of resources, or how do you think, not very much you personally, but what can encourage them to go out and vote, read news resources to find out how they should vote, or in another kind of sense, what is pushing them back from voting?
I think the latter part needs to be tackled before the former, and that is Gen Z is facing one of the worst wars ever fought in humanity in its lifetime, and that is the battle of good versus evil. So Today, the lack of religion is probably the strongest force that is pushing my generation to not vote, to not care. They have a sense of hopelessness, nihilism. They're sedentary. They don't want to interact. They're lonely. They're depressed. And it's going to have disastrous consequences. And the statement is true, and it holds true all the time. And it's this: strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. Weak men create tough times. Tough times create strong men. And so what we are is we're currently in the hard times because the weak men before us didn't do anything. And so what we'll see in this generation is a lack of empathy towards those who came before us, and more for our own generation and those that come after us. We're going to take the same approach as our ancestors, and that is, I'm going to build a stronger country for those that come after me and the later generations.
That was Riley Wassler from ISU's Turning Point USA. Coming up in our next episodes of Democracy's Future, we'll hear from international students and what they think about democracy in the U.S., and from students who are already getting experience in the democratic process by participating in student government. Our thanks to audio producers Ryan Toohey and Ariel Jones, WGLT Digital Content Director Ryan Denham, and WGLT News Director Eric Stock. Please give us your feedback on this series and let us know if there are certain issues you'd like us to explore. Email us at news@wglt.org. Subscribe to Democracy's Future on the NPR app or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, I'm Megan Spurline. Thank you for listening.